They swore it was a secret. Now everyone's watching a classified threat, and the irony is dripping off the walls like wet paint. The same people who whispered behind your back, who tried to hide your potential under their insecurity, truly believed keeping you small was a sustainable strategy. They thought silence around your name would control how far you'd rise, how much you'd grow, how dangerous you'd become. But potential doesn't stay buried forever. Pressure cracks ceilings, truth leaks. Power radiates whether anyone announces it or not, and suddenly the very thing they tried to conceal is now the thing the whole world sees. Clear, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Their secret didn't stay hidden because secrets built on fear never do. Fear begs to be exposed. There's a psychological phenomenon called suppression backlash. The harder someone tries to contain something powerful, the more violently it expands when it slips free. That's exactly what happened with you. Their attempts to minimize your strength only intensified it. Their need to control your trajectory sharpened your instincts. Their silence forced you inward, and inward is where real transformation starts. They treated you like information too dangerous to circulate, and by doing so, they created that danger themselves. Now the eyes they wanted to shield from you are staring directly at you. Not because you shouted for attention, but because suppressed power has a habit of exploding into awareness at the perfect time. What's unraveling them now is the visibility, the spotlight they never wanted pointed in your direction. The world is finally noticing the depth, the resilience, the intelligence they hoped would stay hidden. That attention terrifies them because it exposes how wrong they were about you. Or worse, how right they knew they were but refused to admit. People who swear something is a secret often do so to protect themselves, not the subject of the secret. They knew your potential would make their mediocrity obvious. They knew your rise would make their stagnation embarrassing. And now that everyone's watching, they're choking on the truth they tried to bury. The dynamics of secrecy always reveal motives. Real secrets are kept to protect. False secrets are kept to control. And what they kept hidden wasn't a flaw. It was a threat to the fragile ego structure they built around themselves. They didn't want anyone seeing the real you, because the real you outshines them without even trying. You didn't climb ladders. They're built from your old wounds. You didn't beg for validation. You learned to thrive without applause. That independence threatened everything about the hierarchy they relied on, and the moment your growth became visible, their hierarchy collapsed. Visibility didn't change you. It exposed them. What truly unsettles them is that you never fought for recognition. There was no campaigning, no showcasing, no desperate attempt to prove your worth. The transformation was silent, internal, deliberate. And that silence is what terrifies them most. Loud people are predictable. Quiet power is unpredictable. You evolved without announcing it. And now they're realizing that what grows in darkness often emerges as something unstoppable. Your calm presence feels like a classified weapon, quiet but catastrophic. People sense when someone has passed through fire and come out colder, sharper, more precise. That's why everyone is watching now. They feel the shift before they understand it. Their discomfort is rooted in exposure. When someone they underestimated suddenly becomes someone the world admires, it forces a confrontation with their own insecurity. They didn't keep you secret because you were ordinary. They kept you secret because you were extraordinary. If you had failed, they would have broadcasted it. But because you succeeded, they hid it. That's all the proof you ever needed about where the real threat was. Not in you, but in how much of themselves they saw reflected in your potential. And now every gaze you attract feels like a spotlight on their failure to hold you back. The power politics of this moment are fascinating. You aren't threatening anyone directly, yet the entire structure of old alliances is shifting around your existence. People who once ignored you now lean in. People who dismissed you now reassess. People who doubted you now avoid eye contact. Your growth has created a silent redistribution of power. That's why you're suddenly a classified threat. Not because you intend harm, but because your presence alone destabilizes the illusions others rely on. In psychological terms, you've become a disruptive variable, an unpredictable force that invalidates old assumptions. What makes this evolution so lethal is that you didn't break any rules. You didn't betray anyone. You didn't manipulate or scheme. You simply kept growing, kept healing, kept sharpening yourself until the world had no choice but to notice. Growth without permission is the most defiant act a person can commit, and defiance cloaked in humility is the hardest threat to neutralize. They can't discredit you without exposing their own insecurity. They can't attack you without revealing their own intentions. They can't ignore you without looking foolish. That's why they're sinking under the weight of a secret that is no longer theirs to control. Your rise illuminates every lie they told about you. The stillness they mocked has become discipline. The quiet they disrespected has become strategy. The solitude they labeled weakness has become strength. Watching you evolve dismantles every projection they cast onto you. And those projections weren't harmless. They were armor for their ego. Now that armor is cracking. People who once believed their narrative now see your reality. And nothing terrifies a storyteller more than losing control of the story. Their downfall is happening because the foundation they built their confidence on was never real. It relied on keeping you unseen, unheard, unrecognized. They believed that as long as the world didn't know your strength, they could pretend your strength didn't exist. But exposure is corrosive to delusion. Once people began to notice you, your composure, your intelligence, your quiet ascendancy, the false hierarchy they constructed around your supposed insignificance started collapsing. Their power was never internal, it was comparative. They needed you small so they could feel large. Now that you're no longer the baseline for their superiority, their identity is crumbling. They weren't prepared for the psychological freefall that follows the loss of a manufactured throne. A different angle of their collapse lies in the way their choices are being reevaluated. Every act of sabotage, every attempt to hide your abilities, every whispered, "Don't take them seriously," is reappearing in the minds of the same people now watching you rise. The narrative is shifting. What was once dismissed as their judgment is now seen as their insecurity. The downfall isn't just personal, it's social. Reputation deteriorates the moment intention becomes transparent. People begin connecting dots, realizing the secret they guarded wasn't dangerous to the world, it was dangerous to their ego. And now that truth is rippling outward, dismantling whatever prestige they tried to protect. Time plays a role in their unraveling as well. Growth that happens in silence tends to mature into something undeniable, and once undeniable, it becomes impossible to contain. Their downfall accelerates as every day reveals another layer of your evolution. They miscalculated your trajectory because they assumed their perception was the only one that mattered. But the world has eyes of its own, and those eyes have begun recognizing what they overlooked. This mismatch between how they defined you and how the world sees you creates cognitive dissonance, an inner tearing that exposes their mistakes, their arrogance, and their fear. Another force eating away at them is envy, the kind that becomes corrosive when denied. They swore their secrecy protected you, but the emotion beneath it was jealousy disguised as caution. Now that people are witnessing your strength, envy can no longer hide behind excuses. It's visible in the way they react, in the tightness of their voice, in the sudden coldness of their presence. Envy is a silent admission of inferiority, and watching themselves react with such bitterness is pushing them deeper into psychological collapse. They aren't just sinking because you rose. They're sinking because they can't handle why your rise affects them so deeply. Internal guilt is beginning to surface too. For everything they concealed, every chance they withheld, every room they tried to keep you out of, there is now evidence contradicting their actions. Witnessing your competence forces them to acknowledge their sabotage. And guilt is a heavy emotion for someone who thought they were justified. It rewrites their memories in ways that sting. Their downfall is happening because they must now face not only what they did, but why they did it. And the why reveals more about them than they ever wanted exposed. Another layer of their collapse comes from losing control of the narrative. Manipulators rely on controlling the storyline, what people think, how events are interpreted, which truths are allowed to be seen. But now that the world is watching you, the narrative has escaped them. They can no longer spin your silence into weakness, your humility into ignorance, your patience into laziness. The truth is standing beside you in plain sight, Losing narrative control is fatal for those built on image rather than substance. Their downfall accelerates every time you walk into a room and people see you for who you really are. There's also the terror of irrelevance pressing against them. You grew without their permission, and growth without permission is the most threatening thing a fragile ego can witness. They once believed they were gatekeepers, guardians of opportunity, arbiters of value, but your rise proves how unnecessary their approval actually was. And when someone realizes the world moves forward without needing them, they feel themselves shrinking. Irrelevance is a psychological sinkhole. Once it opens beneath a person, it doesn't close. Their downfall is happening because they are losing the illusion that they matter as much as they pretended to. Panic enters the equation as well. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the subtle psychological unraveling that happens when someone realizes they can't stop what's coming. Your visibility is beyond their control now. Their attempts to minimize you are failing publicly. Their confidence is thinning. They can't reverse the exposure. Panic makes people irrational, and irrational decisions accelerate collapse. Every step they take to regain control only reveals how little control they actually have. Their downfall isn't a dramatic explosion. It's a slow bleed from every insecurity they can no longer hide. Projection is beginning to backfire too. For years they may have labeled you, own, stable, prepare ready, projecting their own fears onto you. But now the evidence contradicts their claims. The world sees your competence, your steadiness, your growth, and that contradiction forces those projections to bounce back onto the sender. When a person is confronted with the truth that every insult they used was actually a self-description, the psychological recoil is devastating. Their downfall is happening because their own words are returning home, each one carrying a mirror. What's crushing them now is the realization that the downfall didn't strike from the outside. It bloomed from within. Their behavior, their choices, their manipulations formed the very fault lines that are now splitting their identity open. They always assumed danger approached from beyond the walls, never imagining the real threat was the rot inside their own foundations. And your rise didn't create that rot, it revealed it. That revelation is a psychological implosion. The kind that doesn't happen all at once, but in slow, painful increments. Every moment they're forced to watch you stand taller, move calmer, speak clearer. They feel another fracture inside themselves. Their downfall is happening because they architected a world that cannot survive contact with your truth. A fresh layer of that collapse is coming from social exposure. People are beginning to notice the contrast between how they described you and who you actually are. The discrepancies are widening. Their credibility is thinning. And in social psychology, when credibility erodes, power erodes with it. They lose influence, not because of anything you've done directly, but because your competence silently undermines their narrative. Every compliment you receive feels like a nail in the coffin of the story they tried to craft. Every acknowledgement of your growth forces others to question why such potential ever needed hiding. Their downfall is happening because the crowd sees more clearly now, and clarity is poison to deceit. Their unraveling also stems from the collapse of emotional leverage. For so long, they relied on the belief that your identity depended on their approval. They assumed you needed them to feel validated, valued, visible. But your recent evolution, steady, deliberate, unbothered, proves you don't require their existence at all. That independence is a psychological severing of the highest order. The more self-sufficient you become, the more they feel themselves shrinking. When someone realizes they no longer possess emotional leverage over the person they once controlled, they experience a loss akin to grief-the denial, anger, bargaining, collapse. Their downfall is happening because the emotional currency they depended on has become worthless. And then comes the dread, the slow, creeping awareness that they played the wrong game with the wrong opponent. They misread your silence as ignorance, your patience as paralysis, your humility as weakness. Only now do they understand the error. You weren't waiting for their permission. You were waiting for your moment. And that moment arrived like a quiet storm, sweeping away every illusion they crafted. They fear you now, not because you threatened them, but because they misjudged you so catastrophically that it exposes their incompetence. Their downfall is happening because the game they invented has turned against them.